And thank you, Danny and Zara, for giving up your time as well. This is the first sort of main partnership activity we've done with London Pulse, which is fantastic and exciting, and I'm sure there's a lot more to come in the future. Danny and Zara can introduce themselves shortly. I'll just give you an overview of what we're going to sort of do over the next hour, so you guys can sort of see what's going on. We'll go through the topics that were listed in the registration. So talk about Zara's injuries, sort of mental health and the other things around that. Ultimately, we want you guys to leave the session picking up sort of one or two sort of key nuggets of information that might help you work better with athletes if you're a physio or sports therapist, or even if you're an athlete and you're going through injuries or rehab process, how you can better cope with injuries. So we'll talk about that for about 40 odd minutes, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end, which will be for about 20 odd minutes as well. Don't wait until 40 minutes in to ask your questions. Ask them, fire away throughout. There's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, or maybe at the top if you're on your phone. So pop your questions in there, and then other people can like or upvote your questions. So the most popular ones will get to the top. Try avoid putting them in the chat box, just because we may miss them when we come around to the Q&A. So please fire away with any questions. That'd be fantastic. So I think let's start with Danny. Do you just want to introduce yourself and give a bit of an overview for people of what you do with London Pulse?
Yeah, sure. My name is Danny Titmus. I am the head of the academy, so I run the pathway at London Pulse, which is our junior team. So under 21s, 19s, 17s, we have 12 hubs. And also a multi-sport program, which I oversee. And then I am also the assistant coach for the VNSL team, of which Zara is one. And that in a nutshell is what I do with Pulse.
Perfect. Brilliant. And Zara, do you just want to give a bit of an introduction for yourself as well?
Yeah, hi, I'm Zara Everitt. I'm currently a player for London Pulse in the NSL team. This is my second season with Pulse, and my fifth season in the Super League overall. I've also, alongside that, I've represented England from kind of under 17s through to senior level, on tours to a few different places like Jamaica and New Zealand, and have represented England at the European Championships, but have been kind of plagued over the last year by an Achilles injury, which I guess we'll talk a bit more about.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think say the very successful career at a very young age as well. So, yeah, we'll touch upon those sort of stuff throughout, definitely. Yeah, do you want to start with just sort of the last year? I know we talked before about your injuries. Do you just want to give everybody who's watching a bit of an overview of what you've had injuries sort of from? I think it was sort of 2019 it started.
Yeah, so I guess before 2019, I never really had any serious injuries at all. I'd had a couple of kind of like ankle sprains and things like that, as most netballers do. But then around the beginning of 2019, started to get discomfort in my Achilles tendon on the left side, and kind of struggled through the second half of the season and then through a tour in the summer. Wasn't too bad, never took a break from playing or training or anything like that. But then ultimately at the end of 2019, around November, sorry, my dog's just gone.
That's right.
At the end of 2019, I kind of got to a point where I played in a match, jarred my Achilles, and then couldn't walk for a couple of weeks, and so was sent to get an MRI, which basically showed that I had a partial tear in my tendon, and in addition to a few other micro tears. Was in a boot for 6 weeks and then went through a rehab process, which took about 8 to 10 weeks, and was due to start to play again mid-March before COVID hit.
Yeah, perfect. And so in that 2019, when you had the sort of pain, that was all manageable and you played throughout, but I think you said you started January 2019 was when it kind of, you realised you're starting to get a bit of pain, and sort of played throughout until December when you had the scan?
Yeah, so I think, in 2019, I was playing for a different team. And didn't really have that much of a relationship with the physio there. Hadn't really, I'd actually taken a break from Super League for a couple of months, and hadn't really had any physio contact. So I think I wasn't very keen to be open about how much pain I was in, because I was fighting for a position in the team. Didn't want them to see that, see that I was kind of having any weaknesses. And so occasionally got a bit of acupuncture treatment because they thought that might help the pain. But yeah, I think that I had a massive increase in loading when I returned to Super League training, and that obviously exacerbated the problem as well. And then had a few weeks where I was off feet prior to going on, starting training for tour in the summer. And then obviously on a tour, you're playing matches every single day and sometimes having training sessions twice a day as well. So that was, again, another massive increase in loading, which probably contributed to the problem. But yeah, as I say, I was able to continue throughout.
So it's interesting one that you picked up there, that kind of, I suppose not hid it, but didn't want to delve into too much of the details of the pain you're in, because all you want to do is get on and play and fight for your position. In hindsight, do you think would you do the same, or do you think it was a hindrance to not say as much, or not really?
I've potentially, because I think that from what I understand, the nature of a tendinopathy is it's like an overuse injury. So maybe if I could have picked up on it earlier or taken time off feet earlier on, then maybe it could have been resolved. I think the issue for me was that because I'd never had a serious injury before, and I'd occasionally had, I'd have a sore knee for a week and then it would just go away. I was kind of waiting for it to go away, and then the fact that it didn't took me by surprise almost. So I think that's the difficulty with something like a tendinopathy.
Yeah, and I think speaking to other sort of professional athletes, and the biggest learning from a lot is it comes with age and experience of knowing your body. So like you say, you never had a big injury, so everything else prior to that is very much sort of walk it off or run it off. And you only know through learning and doing that. So I just wanted to bring Danny in on this point. So one of the questions I had was, in terms of what you guys do at London Pulse, or generally in terms of injury prevention, preparing for matches, what kind of things do you implement in terms of stuff for your warm-ups? Is there a very specific warm-up? I think you mentioned sort of things like landing skills. Danny, do you just want to kind of tell people what that's all about?
Yeah, so the guys, so any like technical session we do, there's always an element of prehab that the girls will go through, and that is just integrated into their warm-up. So that'll be things to do with like hops, jumps, hops and turning, and then even in terms of like their match day warm-ups, there'll be stuff in there too. So they'll do some partner work where there'll be probably not as much as that they would do in a technical session, but it will be some element, little few hops, but also under pressure of getting pushed and looking at their stability as well. And that a lot of that is set by Dan Laverpour, who is our S&C coach.
Perfect. And Zara, is there anything that you now do, whether it's specific to this injury or just general like preparation for games, that you think's vital? Some people are that's making sure they have enough sleep, to have specific meals. Is there anything that you guys do, that you do personally, that gets you physically prepared for matches?
Yeah, I think obviously a couple of things you mentioned, sleep and food, are obviously important. I think something that I've grown to not only kind of want to do, but also need to do, and I'm kind of aware of how much difference it makes now, is doing the rehab things with resistance bands, whether that's squats, lateral raises, bridges, and things like that, just to activate your glutes. And I think that's, for me, that was something I started, when I was like 14, 15, we were introduced to that in a pathway program, but was something that I definitely took for granted and would occasionally not do because, if we didn't have as much time in warm up, we would just ditch that bit. But for me, I know now how much that can impact the way my Achilles feels throughout the session, because of the way, the way that my Achilles turns, because of the way that I run, obviously has contributed to whether my glutes are activated or not. So things like that do have an impact, and is something that I'm more conscientious about doing now, and would probably feel pretty uncomfortable if I was made to start a session without doing that. Also, like the usual stuff like dynamic stretches, dynamic movements like skipping, side steps, things like that, I find really makes a difference, especially if I've had a long journey in and I'm not feeling very mobile. It does make a difference to my Achilles.
Are you somebody that has quite a meticulously like routine in terms of their warm-up, like has to do certain things, or are you quite sort of relaxed about that?
Sometimes I am. I think I'm quite relaxed considering how much I feel like I have to get through. I'm quite strict in the sense that at the moment, Danny can probably account for the fact that especially when I first started training again, I would just run up and down and up and down and up and down before everyone had even started going yet, just because I was so conscious about it getting stiff, and was worried that if I stopped, then I wouldn't be able to train. So would get a bit strict about that. But in terms of, doing whether I do 10 squats or 15, I'm not particularly bothered about.
Cool. And then, so if we go back to last year, obviously challenges that everyone sort of faced with COVID, but you had your rehab at sort of start of the year, and just as COVID hit, you were about to play. It was sort of mid-March time, wasn't it? So how did you psychologically kind of sort of adapt or pick yourself up from that? Or, I mean, at the time, maybe it was only because we didn't even know how long this was going to go on for, but how was that sort of from March to, let's say, sort of December time? How did you feel throughout the whole sort of time period?
It was, I think initially didn't really hit me that much. And in a way I feel like I was kind of relieved actually, because whilst I was really looking forward to playing, it's obviously quite scary to go from not having played at all and really only completed 2 full weeks of training to then playing in a full Super League match against one of the hardest teams in the league, as it was supposed to be. And so initially I was like, okay, well, I would be grateful for maybe another couple of weeks and to not miss a match, but then because obviously we all assumed that it would just be 2 weeks before we started playing again. But then obviously it was really disappointing to find out that I would be missing a whole season. I don't know. I think it was quite easy to feel supported in that time because of the fact that everyone else was obviously disappointed and everyone else was trying to stay motivated and continue working together. And at Pulse especially, we didn't really stop at all. We carried on with Zoom S&C sessions every day and we were completely connected. So that was really, really helpful. I had Zoom calls with the physio every week or twice a week and had my program set for me, which I was continuing to follow. So it was obviously difficult, and I think probably the most difficult thing in terms of rehab was that most of it had been a concentration on loading my calves, and when you haven't got any equipment at home, it's really difficult to do that. But yeah, I think that was probably the biggest challenge, was not having access to things that I knew were helping my Achilles recover.
Just to touch upon somebody just asked a question in, I just wanted to address that. So for the timeline, so how long were you out of action for from start of injury to obviously return to play?
So December was when I was put off feet and put into the boot. And then I would have been, I mean, it depends on what you account for out of action. I think I started running again probably at the start of March. So maybe 3 months. Cool.
So you would have played, so you would have been back in action sort of mid to late March, mid-March. So yeah, about 3 or 4 months. And then obviously because of COVID, then it's been another 6 or 7 months where you haven't been able to play. And you say, I think this was your first or second season with Pulse? It would have been.
This is my second season now.
Second. So relatively new to the team and stuff. So I'm sure that has its own challenges in terms of wanting to make an impact and settle in and sort of earn your stripes a little bit. So how did the injury affect that, I suppose? Did it play in your mind at all or not?
I think it definitely has. I think one of the most difficult things is that whilst a lot of us were new to Pulse, we weren't really new to each other, and I played with all of the other defenders in the unit bar one. A lot of the other girls in the team as well I knew and had been in teams with. So I wasn't too concerned about that necessarily, but it is really difficult to build relationships as quickly when you're not on court. And as I said, it was a really supportive environment to be in, and I did feel included, but you're never going to get the same sense of relationship where you're not in the changing room and you're not in the team huddles and you don't necessarily feel part of the wins that we had at the start of the season. So that was difficult. But I think because of the fact that we've had this big gap and we haven't been together, coming in now, it doesn't feel like I've missed out on so much because everyone's in the same boat.
Yeah, I suppose that's the blessing of this, is everybody has kind of time is kind of being paused, I suppose, with this. So if you are injured or out of action or whatever, then everyone's not having to watch it on TV and watch the success unfold before your eyes. In terms of, so you had your rehab and obviously looking to be back in action mid-March, and then COVID hit. What was your I suppose relationship or contact with the physios and S&C guys throughout the year?
So every day throughout the rehab process, so that was prior to COVID, I was putting in my scores for whether I was like out of 10. I would put for stiffness and soreness every day when I woke up, how my Achilles was feeling. So that was, the initial point of contact I would have. And if there were any significant changes, obviously they would contact me immediately, or I would contact them to say something's not right. As I said, we would have Zoom calls, and our session would be sent through. Our weekly sessions will be sent through at the start of the week, or whether it was at the start of the month, and that kind of thing. So we stayed in contact that way. I think that the most important thing I found was that if there was a change in my program, or even if something in my program stayed the same but had started to change in the way that it affected my body, was communicating that with the physio straight away. Because as I said, obviously our programs changed dramatically from lifting heavy 2 or 3 times a week to doing bodyweight circuits, and we were doing longer runs and things like that, which we would never usually do. So a change in training kind of meant that we had to communicate more with the physio and the S&C, definitely, and be open and honest about how it was affecting us.
And if you could, obviously entering probably similar circumstances over the next 6 weeks now, is there anything that you would have learned or taken from the last lockdown to this upcoming one, and what you would do differently or try change?
I think, to be honest, practice what I preach. I was saying that we need to have open communication, and I probably left it too long to flag up that I couldn't do a 3K run, because whilst that doesn't seem very far, it is far for someone who's got an Achilles tendinopathy. And I kind of did 2 or 3 long runs without saying that it was causing me issues, because I was waiting for it to settle down. So I think that, again, it's like that willingness to admit that you're actually not quite right, and recognise that as soon as the earlier you flag it, the quicker it can be resolved. So that's something that I hope to do this time on.
I think that's a big struggle for a lot of athletes. Is there anything that you feel that worked really well that physios did to help you be open and honest, or even the coaches or people surrounding you that made you go, actually, I am feeling a bit injured, I need to tell somebody about this? Yeah,
for sure. I think that I don't know, it sounds silly, but almost a bit of an ego boost is always good. Whenever I would have the physio saying to me, like, don't worry, you're in good shape, you can, hitting all your targets, the coach wants you back playing, she has this in mind for you this season, she's not kind of just left you by the wayside, and she's not gonna be not interested in your recovery and that kind of thing. And that was echoed through with all of the staff, whether it was from Danny or from Sam, our head coach. The message was very clear from all of the staff that my recovery was the most important thing, and that I shouldn't be worrying about whether or not I was going to be in the starting 7 when I returned to play.
Yeah, that's an interesting point as well. And Danny, it'd be interesting to get your sort of viewpoint on that. So is there a significant focus for those players that are injured to help them get back? And do you have a kind of a strategy in place, or is it pretty just?
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on the athlete. So they'll all have a return to play process. It's not like, oh, you've been injured, okay, brilliant, let's get you full training next week, I'm sure it'll be fine. They're assessed by the physio, and then they'll undergo a return to play, and that is completely individual to the athlete, the injury. And even along that return to play, they're constantly monitored in terms of if they're on track, and can they actually be elevated a few steps forward, or is it not? Not to talk about COVID, but even for some of those that are on a return to play following a positive COVID test, that is really, really individual and specific, because it's to do with their heart rate. So if their heart rate's fine, fab. If not, then they go back a few steps. And it's the same with any of these programs. It's like, this is what we hope would happen, but actually you deal with the athlete that's presented to you, in their current state.
I definitely. Oh, sorry.
No, go on, Zara. No, go on.
I was just going to say that I think that is something that I found to be really important and motivating as well, was that the physio that we had at the time, who's not with us this season, but I found, really good to work with, was that he constantly recognised that I was someone who enjoyed having goals set for me. I wanted to, if I was ready to go to the next stage, then he would put me onto the next stage. He wouldn't, he wasn't going by the book kind of thing. Obviously, he was being cautious and was aware that we didn't want to rush things. But if I had gone for a week without pain and I'd been hitting all my targets, then he would move me on to the next thing, even if that phase was supposed to last 2 weeks rather than one. So that, I think, boosts your own confidence as well as an athlete, because you know that, one, you're doing the right things, and that also the people who are supporting you have your best interests and want you to keep improving.
I think from discussions we've had before, and I think it's definitely understanding the player and managing the person, not just the injury, is such a key element of this. And sort of listening to what you're saying, Zara, is the motivation to do the rehab and to kind of follow it, because I'm sure parts of it are quite tedious as well. So, and being remote and doing it via Zoom and stuff, it can be a bit, motivation is a key issue. So it's interesting to see the relationship that you have with the physio and the coaching staff, and the coaching staff have with the physio as well. In terms, please go on.
Zara as well, because I'm sure as you guys are realizing, she's incredibly ambitious and would work incredibly hard, and for her to not take part in part of a session was visibly difficult for her. So even if we were doing something with sprints, or most people are like, for you, I am out of them sprints. So I would be there like, oh God, I'm missing out on the sprints. So it is, you want to give athletes, and Zara in this case, the reassurance that it's okay, you're on track, you're doing the right things, and you're doing what you need to do to get your body in the best possible shape to go out and perform in the best possible way that you can. And if that means not doing something, that's equally important as, some people doing an extra session or whatever.
So it'd be interesting. So a big challenge a lot of therapists have is the pressure from coaches to get players back. So obviously Zara's a key player. As a coach, you want her back.
Yeah.
From a physio perspective, they want them back fit and ready. How do you manage that? Because it's all well and good saying, take your time and get back fully fit, but there's also the stresses of it's a results-based business and we need Zara back as quick as possible. How do you manage that as a coaching team?
I think that, exactly what you've said is how we would say it, is that Zara is, a key member of that team. She's important in our squad, but she's important long term. So, we don't want Zara to be a one-hit wonder and come back and play one game and be like, brilliant, that was your debut and your last game. Sam's vision for the team is actually those athletes that are with us. We have a significantly younger squad than most other Super League teams, and the idea is that those guys will be together for the next 5, 10, however many years, but that is a team that will go on to win the Super League in the future. So we see this, all of these athletes, long-term members of the club. So that's why it's kind of like, let's get her back this season and next game for sure, but make sure that she's fit and healthy and that she's good to go.
I suppose that comes with the long-term goal setting and the long-term objectives help that, because maybe in other sports where you could be sacked the next day kind of thing, and probably netball as well. But it's, having that long-term vision and building towards something, I suppose, eases the pressure a little bit of the we need to win next game or else type scenario. Perfect. So we're getting a lot of questions through, which is fantastic. What we'll just do is touch upon the mental health side of things and just kind of discuss that a little bit, and a little bit about the resilience side of things as well, and then we'll go into the Q&A. So keep putting the questions in, guys, because there's some good ones coming through. So Zara, obviously, I don't want to keep banging on about last year just because it's prevalent at the minute. But what positives would you have taken from the whole situation in terms of the injury and the rehab process and where you are now?
I think firstly, it gave me a lot of time to work on things that I wouldn't ordinarily be able to work on. Like I ended up having, I think that what was surprising to me was that the rehab process actually went really, really quickly because I had so many sessions to get in, because I was trying to focus on obviously my actual Achilles rehab, maintaining my single leg strength in my other leg whilst I still had the boot on. I had to keep going to the gym and just doing leg press with my right leg. And then obviously I had to come in after the boot and try and get my left leg up to the same level. So I had all of those sessions, but on top of that, I was working on other things like my upper body strength, because I obviously couldn't do a lot of on feet running, or I wasn't even allowed to go on the bike at one point. So I had sessions that were completely upper body, which I'd never had a solely upper body session before. I'd always been mixed in with other lower body stuff, just because that had never been a focus for us as netball players. We obviously have a few exercises in there just to keep us kind of robust and strong, but really the focus is always on lower body, I guess, because of injury prevention. That's more important, and obviously explosiveness and everything comes from your legs. But it gave me an opportunity to build upper body strength that I didn't have before, gave me the opportunity to gain perspective from watching the other players on court, doing video analysis, which is obviously stuff that you would do anyway, but when you've got so much extra time because you're not training, you fit in all these other things. I actually ended up spending more time on training and analysis than I'd ever done before. So yeah, it gave me the opportunity to improve myself in other ways, which was exciting.
And when you were doing things like upper body or the video analysis and stuff, did you say, okay, right, I'm going to, for next week or 6 months, I'm going to work on this? Or did you have to set it out as in like a schedule for yourself, or was it kind of ad hoc, oh, I'm going to do this or whatever?
I don't know. I think it's from the upper body perspective, it was that I actually so I had sessions that I would be set at the beginning, and most of it would be like a cardio circuit, but this is when we had access to gyms, and I discovered battle ropes and boxing and things like that, which I'd like never touched before. So that was kind of exciting to me, and I got a bit addicted to going and doing those circuits, like making them up. So that was initially structured by the S&C, and then I would end up going and doing extra ones anyway, a bit ad hoc. But then in terms of the video stuff, I think for most people, when we do video analysis, you just watch yourself, and obviously you look at your unit and things like that as well. But most of the time it's about individually, what have I done right, what have I done wrong? But when you're not even on the video, you obviously can't do that. So yeah, it just gave me a sense of perspective to actually sit down and look at other people. And often I would, rather than just completing a task that was for myself, so usually we'll get set tasks, say, find 3 clips where you've done something well, find 3 clips where you've done something you need to improve on. But I would just end up watching the whole match again and look at what other people are doing. So that was, I guess, it wasn't something that was set for me, but the coaches had said to me, obviously use this opportunity to improve in other ways, and that's how I decided to do it.
And did you find stepping away from netball I know you're sort of studying at the minute, did having interest outside of netball help in terms of the whole thing, just having other things to focus on as well?
Yeah, no, I think that it's obviously a fine balance between, I put a lot of time and energy into my rehab and into other things, like I've said, but it does obviously get frustrating at points, and you're always going to hit a point where you're like, oh, I don't want to think about my rehab, I've had enough of this. And it is really important to be able to take a break from that. So whether that's, socializing more, or the fact that I knew that I wouldn't be going to a game or training meant that I could go and see my friends or anything like that. So although I was still attending the training session, you just seem to have a bit more time around it because you don't have to prepare as much, I guess. So it is important to also speak to people who aren't related to your sport, because they can give you a bit of perspective as well.
Definitely. I'm glad you used the word perspective, because that nicely puts me on to the next sort of topic and conversation. So we were talking before this with Danny about your trip from the Youth World Cup across to New Zealand and being made captain and everything. So Danny or Zara, whoever wants to sort of take this, do you just want to give an overview of that sort of story, and then we can kind of discuss that in terms of perspective and how important it is to understand the personality and what they're going through as well?
You want to do it, Zara, or do you want me to say it from my point of view, my perspective, and then you can say it from yours?
Yeah, you go ahead. You tell the story so well, Danny.
So I've coached Zara in several settings, and one of the other settings that I was Zara's coach was an under-19s tour, which was in New Zealand. So Zara joined. She was also selected to be part of the World Youth Cup long
squad.
squad, would you call it?
Yeah, I was a travelling reserve.
Travelling reserve. Okay, so and that was in South Africa. So when the team, this is like the last cycle, when the team left South Africa and then went to Botswana to go and play the actual World Youth Cup, the two travelling reserves were both under 19. So they came from South Africa and then flew to New Zealand to join us on our tour in New Zealand. And from our point of view, we were like, how incredible is that? They've been in South Africa and now they're here in New Zealand. How fortunate they must be, over the moon to be here. Both of them were like more experienced athletes as well within the group. So we were like, brilliant, let's make Zara captain. That seems to make sense. She's, knew the girls really well. From our point of view, was an established athlete within the netball circle, and we were like, yeah, makes perfect sense. She'll love it. And then only recently, Zara was talking to some athletes about her perspective on that, and it was somewhat different. So, Zara, do you want to say how you actually?
Yeah. So I guess Amy Carter was the other athlete who was a travelling reserve. And we had just been in the holding camp, was what we're calling it, in South Africa, and had kind of done all of the boring aspects of tour, which is like a landing plan, and you have to do straight line running and then change direction, and then go into contested play and things like that. So we had done all of that kind of build up to it, and all the other girls were really excited to go and play in their first international competition. And because we obviously weren't selected to play in the competition, we then flew from South Africa to New Zealand, and we cried when the girls left us. They came and knocked on our door because their flight was before ours, and it was actually just really difficult for us to kind of get over the fact that we were going from what we had, was kind of the pinnacle of what girls our age were doing in netball, to something that was obviously still a really, really great opportunity, and we were thankful to be able to go to New Zealand, to an under-19 tour for New Zealand, but was kind of a step down is what we were viewing it as, which wasn't great in terms of the attitude that we then took to the tour. Obviously both of us wanted to put complete effort into the tour, and we were definitely training hard and playing as hard as we could when we got there, but we obviously got there jet lagged. The other girls had already got over their jet lag. We then had to do another return to play protocol, which I'm sure most athletes resent having to do that because it's just so boring. But doing it 2 weeks in a row is pretty tough when you're jet lagged. I also had a minor back niggle as well from flying. So yeah, all of that kind of culminated in us also rooming together. So we were just negative energy bouncing off each other. And yeah, I don't think we really made the most of the tour because we just came in with a really negative perspective. And whilst we were trying to make the most of it, we probably were thinking too much of ourselves, really, because of the fact that we'd come from being in the under-21 setting. But yeah, interesting that Danny or the other coaches didn't actually notice that we were.
It was quite bizarre, but also, both of you guys did perform well. You still played well. You were doing a really good job. So some of that stuff we didn't even recognise. Like Amy got selected out of that New Zealand tour. She got selected to be part of like the all-star team. So it's interesting, even though she was struggling, both of you guys were still putting out quality performances on court. One thing that I probably did recognise during that tour is that you'd gone from one coaching style to another, but hadn't, and everything you're saying now, you're like, of course, you'd view it as a step down, and whilst you're still grateful to be in New Zealand on an under-19 tour, you're not in Botswana where, the other guys are playing in the World Youth Cup. But yeah, it was just a really interesting take on it.
It's good to sort of share those stories as well, because even in the current situation, a lot of people, especially yourselves, Zara, wouldn't necessarily explain that the negative, and they'll sort of do the, I suppose, media trained, no, it's fine and everything's okay and not a problem. So it's good to share that, because it shows the sort of relationship you have with Danny and the team there, that you can be open and honest, and people can learn and push forward even when it seems a bit difficult to have those conversations. you mentioned just a technical point, the return to play protocols. Could you just explain what that was? Is that when you were specific because you were traveling to different time zones and different countries? Do you just want to explain that to people?
Yeah, so I think for pretty much every tour that I've been on, the setup is pretty much the same, but sometimes the time scales are different. So most of the time with netball anyway, it's usually quite a big time difference because we go to the Southern Hemisphere. And we have to start off, and for the first day or so, we're not even allowed to run as fast as we can. We'll do a session where it's straight line running, but you have to be at 50% the whole time. I think on one tour as well, I think that may have been for an Australian tour, we weren't even allowed to pass the ball to each other for the first day, for fear that we just couldn't catch anymore. I'm not sure what the logic is behind that, but yeah, so we do straight line running, and then we go into a change direction, which is predicted. So we'll have footwork patterns set out, and then we go into an unpredicted change direction setting. So that will probably include a ball at that point, and we'll be given different patterns to run, but we won't necessarily know what's coming up next. Then we'll go into team drills and things like that, and then gradually it's built up, so then we can have contested training. So how we have defenders on us, so obviously you have to be feeling pretty robust by that point, because it's obviously you're more at risk of injury when you've got someone up against you and when you're landing in a space that's not necessarily free. So yeah, we have to go through this process, and I think it usually takes about 5 or 6 days to get from start to end, depending on what the time difference is, or guess how long the flight was and everything like that.
Yeah, I think both of those ones to New Zealand and Australia, it's the long haul flight. You're on a plane, and even I think when you were with us when we stopped at Singapore, weren't you?
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty cool though. So at Singapore airport, they've got the pool. So we took the girls for we were there I think for like 5 or 6 hours. So we took them for like a swim recovery sesh within the Singapore airport. And it's when it's such a long way, and you're only taking it, I can't remember if we took 12 athletes or 14 athletes, but you're not taking heaps of athletes, and then you've got an extensive match schedule that's coming up. You need to make sure all of those athletes are going to be available. So it is quite a kind of a tentative route back in. It definitely is precautious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd love to talk more about everything like that as well, and there's so much more I want to sort of dive into, but I'm conscious we've got about 26 questions here, so we'll try get through as many as possible. Just to remind people as well, or I think it's upvote the questions that you like that people have asked, so they can go to the top.
There's also, I'm not sure if you've seen it, Charlie, but there's a question in the chat box too.
Okay, yeah, I've seen that. That's quite a fiery one, that one. So then we'll start with Izzy. So do you do extra recovery techniques after training or between sessions to prevent your injury coming back?
Yeah, definitely. I do a lot of foam rolling. I guess most athletes do that anyway. But yeah, I do that more than I did previously. I've got an ice pack on my Achilles as we speak from the session this morning.
Is it a physique ice pack, or is it not?
I'm not sure.
The answer is yes, Zara.
It's definitely yes.
Of course it is.
Yeah, so icing was something that I was a bit reluctant about because I wasn't reluctant to try. Obviously, it's not that extreme a recovery process, but it was something that I didn't really find worked initially, but have now started to do again and have found to help me. So icing for sure, I do extra. I do also, when I can, go and do a session in the pool, which again was something that I kind of got out of my rehab process. That was something that I had to do in my return to play, was pool running and A skips in the pool and things like that. And that's something that I brought into my recovery sessions as well. Yeah, they're the kind of main things I do, other than recovery walks and things like that. And we sometimes have mobility sessions as well. But yeah, most of the time it's stretching and icing and things like that after training.
Perfect. So another one, this is anonymous. What advice would you give to somebody currently suffering with their long-term injury?
I'd definitely say that goal setting is probably the most important thing. I think we touched on it earlier, but knowing what your time scale is really important, because it can be really frustrating when you just feel like it's not going to end, or you don't actually know what you're working towards. So and I think even when you're set exercises to do, knowing exactly what that's going to contribute to, aside from just this is going to help my injury, knowing exactly what it's doing, can not only help with your approach to the rehab and how you feel about it, but also understanding then when your body reacts to what you're doing, being able to then flag that with the physio and actually knowing why it might be is obviously beneficial.
Perfect. Danny, is there any in the Q&A that you think you'd want to ask? Or I've got a couple in the back pocket I've asked.
Let's have a quick look.
Whilst you have a look, I'll just go through a couple more. So Zara, did you worry that your injury would set you back?
Yeah, I think so. I think that it's natural to worry about that, because whilst you're working towards just being fit and being able to be in the same state that you were prior to the injury, there are other people around you who are improving and who are obviously working on things that are more technical or making physical improvements. So that's definitely something that concerned me. For me, for example, at the beginning of last season, a couple of my goals that I'd set were related to improving my elevation and improving my footwork. And they're like the two most difficult things to do when you've got an Achilles problem, because a lot of it is like proprioception and obviously putting strain through your calves and your Achilles. So for me, that was something that I really worried about, because I was like, well, I definitely can't meet these goals this season because I can barely hop at the moment. But yeah, that is definitely something that I worried about.
How did you cope with, did you just sit in a constant state of worry, or how did you then navigate through that?
I think I just had to recognise that there was a bigger picture. That was something that was constantly kind of preached to me by Sam, especially the fact that I'm only 20 now, and that if I wanted to have a career ahead of me, then I had to set aside 6 months even to just get back to where I was before, and that it's not like I was nearing retiring. I had plenty of time to focus on the goals that I wanted to focus on. And so yeah, just recognizing that at the end of the day, everyone's going to face injury at some point, and you're going to be pretty lucky if you don't. So just to not worry about what you're missing out on and focus on the process at hand.
I suppose similar to that is this other question by anonymous attendee. How did you deal with going from being so active to nothing or doing less? And also, how did you find or deal with the return to training in your first rehab, like being less fit or strong, etc.?
So I definitely struggled with the concept of not being able to run or even bike, because obviously when you've got a boot on, it's pretty hard to be on a bike. And I was doing things like single leg rowing and stuff like that. So I guess the way that I dealt with it was just to be creative in what I was doing. In the gym, I was attaching battle ropes to like the sled things that they have, we can stack them up with weights, and I was literally sat on the floor and I would pull it to one end and then I would get my sister to push it down to the other end, and then I would just limp down and do it again. I did loads of boxing, got loads of blisters on my hands because I probably wasn't doing it properly, but was just basically attacking any kind of thing that I could do, and making it as exciting as possible. And in the end, like I said before, I really enjoyed those sessions, and now I still have periods of time where I'm not allowed to do an on-feet conditioning session, and so I'll have to go back to doing boxing or doing battle ropes and things like that. And it just means you've got something in your back pocket for the rest of your career or your life. Obviously, these are things that anyone can do if they want to get active without actually being on feet. So what was the second question you said about?
It was, I think that was kind of it, and it was how did you find or deal with the return to training in your first help, being less fit, but I think you actually came back stronger. So I don't know if you were had to deal with being less fit. I mean, Zara's one of the fittest people in the team, definitely one of the strongest as well. So
I think the biggest difference that I found with the fitness thing was that whilst I felt really really fit because I was doing so many circuits, there's nothing that can replicate running. And going back to doing running in my through my rehab process, I think my first speed session that I did with the physio was what we call a bronco test, which is like what is it? We have basically shuttles, and you have to complete 5 sets of 5 sets of shuttles as quick as you can, or something like that. And you just want to throw up the whole time, really. But because I was determined to get a really good score and was like, well, I'm going to get a score that I would have done prior to this injury, like I will just get that score, that's fine. And I decided that's what I was going to do. It was really, really difficult, and I ended up doing all right, but it was way harder than it should have been. And it's kind of difficult to wrap your head around the fact that despite all the hard work you put in over the rehab process, you're not going to immediately be where you want to be when you do return to play.
I suppose you became a very good boxer though throughout the whole of it.
I think I did. I actually did look up a boxing club, and I was like, I'm going to go to the Olympics.
Yeah, but that is a fascinating thing. With injuries, is other ways of training and doing things like that. Boxing, some people do rock climbing, and it's a way of escaping the sort of tedious rehab processes as well, and sort of encourage physios and therapists to kind of look into that as well, because I think there's definitely sort of motivational stuff that comes out of that. Or it could be to the detriment of London Pulse, and like you say, you become a professional boxer and they just lose one of their star players. George has asked, did you make any adjustments to diet or supplementation to help speed up recovery?
I didn't actually. I think generally I follow quite a strict, well, not super strict, but healthy diet anyway, that's focused on recovery and building muscle mass and things like that. So I didn't really change anything. I've spoken to the nutritionist at England Netball about collagen, because that supposedly could help with joint issues and tendon issues and things like that, and have literally just started taking it. So I'm not sure the effect that it will have, or if it will have any effect, but I wasn't actually advised to really change my diet for the rehab process.
Okay, perfect. And so one from Carl here. So with sleep being an important part of staying fit and recovery, do you ever experience issues getting enough deep sleep cycle? And if so, how do you overcome that?
I usually sleep pretty well, and have prioritized getting enough sleep, because it's something that I didn't used to do. I think that it's quite a struggle sometimes when you have a late night session, you're not getting back until 11:30 or something like that, midnight, and then you have training the next morning. Is quite difficult. But something that I do is making sure that that you prioritize that sleep, and if you need to move the session to later, if you can, then you definitely do that, because there's no point in doing a session if you're not fully recovered, and especially if it's going to be detrimental to an injury or an injury you've had in the past. But yeah, I haven't really struggled with that, because I know that it's so important. It's something that I've always prioritized.
That's good. And quite a specific one. I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this one, Zara, but with the physios and them doing the rehab, first of all, do you have massage at all? Do you have that? So in their massage, do you know if they use is it like oil based for the massage medium to support healing, or other holistic approach at all?
From what it's like a wax, is that right?
Okay, yeah. We know.
Yeah.
Sold at Physique.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Swipe up.
Yeah. So on the actual massage then, so is that part of obviously it may have been a bit altered last year, but was that part of your rehab process to have massage regularly?
Yeah, so now at the moment, whenever the physio is at training, which is most training sessions, I get soft tissue on my calves, and sometimes a bit of manipulation around my Achilles as well, and also my foot. I think they've found that the sole of my foot gets really, really tight, and that can definitely contribute to the soreness of my Achilles. So I get soft tissue as much as I can, really, usually once or twice a week.
Cool. And then one from Anonymous. It's do you have any tips for managing pain after or during a session?
That's a tough one. I think I don't know. I think that occasionally I'll take an anti-inflammatory if the physio has said that's advisable, and that's something that we've tried in the past. I haven't noticed a major difference. and I'm quite bad for just pushing through pain, as in I'll just try and get on with it. So I haven't really tried many pain management techniques. I think the treatment that I'm having at the moment is the shockwave therapy, which is supposed to help with pain management as well, but it's obviously not always super accessible. And again, like I said, sometimes icing it afterwards can provide pain relief as well.
I suppose the main point of that as well is going through the pain and stuff, but knowing when the pain's too much and you need to, naturally there's going to be niggles and pains. You're never going to feel 100%, but knowing the time to speak to the physio and say, should I come off, or obviously that's the hard balance as we discussed earlier.
I think that's also, like, for coaches, that's for us to know our athletes, like what Zara's saying, we know that she would want to push through whatever, like she will want to go above and beyond, and actually sometimes it's even, we were training on what day is it, Wednesday, we were training Tuesday, and we were doing lots of combinations, and it was kind of like repetitive, probably high intensity stuff that was like just double checking, like with the physio, she'll like stay on, and sometimes it will be a case of asking the physio rather than Zara to be like, Zara's going to say yes. Zara will have like an arm hanging off and with one foot, and she'll be like, I'm fine, put me on. So
yeah, I think that's something that I've definitely, I'm still guilty for it for sure. That's something that I can't deny, but I'm definitely better at it than I used to be. And I think that's obviously come from knowing that I'm not going to be criticised for saying I need to stop 15 minutes early. And I think that even if you're an athlete who knows that you're bad at making that decision yourself, I've on occasion had to go to the physio and say to them, you need to tell me, just tell me when to stop, because I actually just don't know where to draw the line. So I think especially for me, when I was in a session, if I come into the session thinking that I'm not feeling great 100%, but I'm allowed to start the session, because you're already experiencing a bit of pain, it's actually hard to know when you should stop, because you don't know whether it's going to ease off or whether it's going to get worse. And so I think being open with the physio from the start of that session, saying that I'm not feeling great, you need to tell me when I can't do any more, and obviously feeding back how it feels throughout the session is important as well.
Yeah, I suppose that feedback from you to them helps them make the sort of more objective decision on that, and knowing you and knowing your pain thresholds and who you are as a person makes that decision easier. A question for you, Danny, here. So in a non-COVID world, how would you try and include injured players with the rest of the squad to help them still feel part of the squad?
Yeah, I think for the most part, you just include them in everything that you possibly can. So normally, like say for example, Zara's injured her foot, but she's still able to throw, and so you can still have them in adapted, modified ways within that training session. If someone's hurt their hand, they can still sometimes be like a post or a body to play against, or sometimes when people have hurt hands, we get them to hold a tennis ball so that they can't use that hand, but they can go stuff with their other hand, or perhaps they've got to do ball work but they sit in a chair, or so there's normally ways in which we would try and include them within the session anyway. They're obviously on all of the communications that go out to the team, and then it's also maybe finding like other roles that they can do. So like Zara was talking about some of those performance analysis tasks. It's like, right, okay, you are a defender, our definition of success for this session is do the defense limit depth on second phase or whatever it is. Tell me, do you see that happening with these players? If we run sets of 5, right, okay, where were they successful? So you're including them in that way where they still have feel valued within that session, even if it's not as a physical participant.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that's spot on. I don't know if you had anything to add from your perspective, Zara, on that.
Yeah, no, I think that it's from a player's perspective, it's really, really good when the coach gives you a job to do, because of course you can be proactive and get on with some ball work. But if there's any chance that you can even be a feeder in a session and have that communication with your teammates, obviously that's preferable, because you can do ball work any time on your own. But when you've got that contact time with your coaches and your team, you obviously want to make the most of it. So I think having those jobs to do, or if you're giving feedback to your teammates or to people who play your position, that's always something that helps you stay engaged.
I think if there's anything a coach would take away from that, it's definitely giving them value and a role within it. There's nothing worse than, I think, if being dropped or injured and kind of being sidelined and a little bit forgotten about, and misery breeds misery and negativity and everything. So no, I think that's a really good point there. So on another one from an anonymous attendee, what psychological support did you have? Say sports psychologist or a life coach? Zara, this one's for yourself.
So we do have access to psychology, both at England Netball and through Pulse as well. And also there's, I think pretty much all of the younger Super League athletes get support through TAS, Talented Athlete Support Scheme as well. So there are so many points of contact to whether you want to speak about how you're feeling about your injury or anything like that. But to be honest, because of the fact that we had so many staff that were involved in the injury from Pulse and from England in terms of coaches, physios and S&C, I felt like I didn't need another person to speak to, and that I felt supported enough, and that from a mental health perspective, I felt like if I needed to speak about anything like that, then I could be pretty open with the people who were already familiar with my situation. So I think that's something that's important to recognise, is it's not always beneficial to bring another person in, although they may have more expertise in that area, and unless you're obviously you are struggling with a more mental aspect.
Just a follow-up question for myself, and so in terms of, you have the support and everything, which is great from physios, etc. In terms of friends and family and outside, do you try tell them, don't even talk to me about netball, or please talk to me about netball, or how do you go about that?
So I definitely talk to my mum a lot about netball. She's probably the person that I would go outside of my actual netball support system. She's the person that I would speak to about it, because I guess if you are having any negative thoughts, you wouldn't necessarily want to say to your coach that you don't want to constantly go, oh, I'm feeling really, really bad about this. But just to have, that way of expelling those thoughts, and maybe getting a kind of perspective that isn't always thinking about the team, because I think it is difficult for any coach to not be thinking about the team, and to have, just solely think about things from a more selfish perspective from my view. So yeah, I definitely speak to my family about it. I don't speak to my friends about it, probably because they don't want to speak to me. They know I would just talk about it too much. But also it does, if you end up talking to everyone about your sport, then you don't have that outlet. And like I said earlier, I think it is important to have people who you can talk about other things with, and won't will just be like, you need to take time away from your concerns about your sport.
Yeah, perfect. I'm conscious of the time, so we'll get through a few more. Eleanor's asked, do you wear any braces or support in matches?
No, I used to strap both of my ankles. Well, initially I used to wear air cast braces. That was quite a few years ago now. And then started strapping instead, but then found that the strapping would rub and aggravate my Achilles. So when I returned to play, I didn't strap either of my ankles. And so currently not using any bracing or strapping. I also tried the K-tape up the back of my calf as well, which sometimes, if it's feeling pretty unstable, or if it is really stiff, then that can help me feel more secure and when I'm running and things like that, but not something that I do all the time. Yeah, I think the only other thing that I do pretty consistently is wear compression socks, because of the fact that my calves get so tight now. I think it's probably just because I do so much calf loading. But yeah.
Perfect. So David Rose asked, so did you ever resort to Googling your injury to see if there was anything that you or your support staff should be doing to enhance your rehab, or did you have 100% faith in the rehab team?
I don't think I did. I think that my mum definitely did.
Okay, that's interesting.
I think that's quite a common thing, because of the fact that I obviously know my physio and I know what my S&C team are doing, and obviously you do a bit of your own research, but pretty much trust that the people are doing the most that they can for you. But obviously someone who comes from a perspective who they don't really know the people who you're working with is always a bit wary of whether they're doing the most they can. but yeah, I pretty much had full faith in what the team were doing, also because of the fact that I felt free to question them. So if there was something that I didn't really understand why we were doing it, or it didn't seem to be working, I would say why we actually, I would actually ask them, and I wouldn't just put blind faith in them. I would challenge them if something didn't feel right to me. So I think that does allow you to trust the team you're working with more, because you hope that you're getting honest answers back.
Yeah, definitely. When you hurt your Achilles, how did you feel motivated and feel like your netball wasn't over?
I think, first of all, whilst you sometimes resent it when you're injured, the fact that the expectation for us is that we come to every single training session. So the fact that you're there and you're involved kind of helps you to know that you're still on the right path. You're still an essential part of the team. And also, I guess, because of the fact that my actual rehab journey from the kind of 8-week period I had coming out of the boot went pretty smoothly, there was never really any doubt in my mind that I wouldn't play again. I think it is more difficult when you face bumps throughout the rehab process, and I have subsequently. I've had flares that have made me doubt whether I would be able to play without pain again. And I think that is something difficult. That's something that's difficult to get over, because you never really. Sometimes when you don't know what's causing a flare, that can be difficult. But again, having those open conversations with the physio is really helpful, and knowing that there are different paths you can take. If this isn't working, we can try this, or if this isn't working, try this. So that ultimately you're going to get back to where you want to be. Perfect.
Danny, is there any questions in there that we keep going through them and they keep going? We're only down to 20 now. We've answered about 15. So it's fantastic that people are getting involved and asking the questions. Danny, we'll do a couple more. Is there any ones that you've got a burning desire to ask that you can see from the list?
I mean, I've seen one at the bottom, which is for me, so I can answer that because.
Go for it. Let's go.
So it says, as a coach, do you perceive or treat previously injured athletes as weaker or different? And my answer would be different. I don't think so. So I treat all athletes differently because they're all different people. So I think you coach the person that's there in front of you. But it depends on what that injury is. People, like most of the athletes that I've worked with, or touch wood, haven't had game-changing injuries where they're like, right, that's it, your career's over. It's always something that they can come back from, even if sometimes they've then had a repeat injury off of that. It's never prevented them performing. Like, I think when I remember coaching Kira, who's another member of our squad, when she was about 14, and she had an ankle injury which then sort of became a bit recurrent, but in terms of working with her, she was still one of our high performing athletes that I would still nominate into national screening events, and I'd still want to select her in part of the team because it was something that I knew she would come back from. So that's been my experience. I hope that helped.
And Zara, so you mentioned recovery as being an important element. How did you guys monitor and measure the effectiveness of the recovery strategy?
I think the key thing was that scoring every day when I send through my soreness and my stiffness, if we were doing a certain recovery plan and it wasn't helping my scores go down, or they were going up after sessions and the recovery processes weren't helping bring them down, then obviously we would know that what we were doing wasn't working. So I think that's something that we utilised a lot. I think in general, the biggest thing that we monitored was that, and also we use a program called PDMS to log in our wellness and our soreness every day. Generally, everyone does that, and also to log in our sessions, so you could see the loading throughout the week and see how much we've been on our feet and that kind of thing. So monitoring those kinds of things, in addition to knowing which recovery you've done, and if you do a recovery session, you put in like recovery 30 minutes. This was a very light session or something like that, and it formulates it all, and therefore the physio knows what's maybe caused a flare or what's helped it settle down.
Brilliant. And So there are loads more questions in there, which we unfortunately we'll wrap it up now, because else I think we could be here till sort of midnight. Just a final question that we ask everybody that does a webinar with physique. Zara, if I start with you, so what advice would you give any young aspiring sports man or woman who wants to become a professional in their sport?
I'd say definitely recognize what your strengths and weaknesses are, and keep working on both of them. I think there's a tendency to, oh, I'm a tall player, therefore I'm going to rely on my height and not work on my elevation or something like that. So recognize that it's just as important to improve what you're best at, and maybe that's kind of your key characteristic and what you're best known for. But then also recognize that it's important to work on, if you have a weakness physically or tactically, that's equally as important to work on.
Brilliant, nice. And Danny, for you, for any aspiring coach or manager of people, what would your number one bit of advice be to them?
So the thing that I've learned about coaching is you're way more successful when you coach. Sounds so cliche, but coach the person, not the sport. So when I've got better results, or the teams that I've got better results with, it's when I've really got to understand those guys as people, and that those athletes have more going on outside of them than just in my case, netball, and that actually for them to do other bits, whether that's, work or another sport or, another hobby or whatever, they then come to our session feeling fresher and they want to be there rather than just tired and fatigued the whole time. So yeah, coach the person, not the athlete.
Nice. I like that. Brilliant. Okay, we'll leave it there, guys. If there are other questions on there, if you do want to get involved and sort of ask the questions, then ping them across to us on any of the socials. Zara, are you on any social, Twitter, things like that? Do you want to let people know where they can find you, or not?
Yeah.
You don't have to.
Yeah, no, sure. I'm on Twitter and on Instagram as well. So on Twitter, it's at Zara Yale E. My Zara Jaele is my little at, and then my Instagram's the same.
Perfect. And Danny, if they got any questions for yourself?
Absolutely. I have the incredibly professional Twitter handle of BellyBoo27. Yeah. So at me. So
you need to change that, Danny.
I don't even know, it's something that I created when I was probably about 20 and thought it was. But yeah.
Brilliant.
27.
We'll add those Twitter handles in for the communications after this to make sure that everybody knows your Twitter handle. Brilliant. All right. Thanks everybody for getting involved tonight. Recording will be sent out to you over the next few days. Thanks again, Zara and Danny, for your time. That was really interesting. I loved it.
Thanks very much.
Very much, Charlie.
Thanks.
Bye.
All right. See you guys soon.